Great thing. I think we can start with introductions first. So if we could go around and go, name, pronouns, where you work, and then also what was your main policy agenda this past session at the legislature. So would someone like to begin?
Sure, I'll begin.
Great, thanks, Julia.
Julia Freeman, Voices for Racial Justice.
Pronouns?
Pronouns she, her, hers. And the policy that we mostly worked on with my part of my work, which is education, was the Teachers of Color bill, to increase more teachers of color.
Good, thank you.
I can go. My name is Anjali Mishra Cameron. I am Research Director at the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans. My pronouns are she, her. And the policy that we worked on most this session, there were two that we spent most of our time on. And one was to increase the quality of medical interpreting, the baseline requirements within the state of Minnesota. And then the other was domestic violence and sexual assault prevention. But adding in a piece where communities are defining what that prevention work looks like, and it's unique and specific to each community.
Cool. Brett?
Hi, Brett Grant, Voices for Racial Justice, Research and Policy Director. And like Julia said, we worked on a lot of different policies, education. The one I was following closely was reparations and expanding working family credit.
Cool.
My name is Theophilus Williams. I'm generally known, I'm commonly known as T. Williams. I am engaged in the community on a number of different projects. I'm retired in one way, but I do some independent consulting work, and I have been involved with a number of different organizations. But my point here is that I have had an interest for quite some time in public policy. I spent 6 years at the Humphrey Institute and research and teaching, and worked for a nonprofit that focused on community issues, and served a term on the Minneapolis School Board, and have been doing some research and writing about the community engagement and what happened back in the 60s and so on. But on this, I was Minnesota's first ombudsman for corrections, and that office went away in 2003. And ever since then, I have had an interest in seeing that it got brought back. So this past legislative session was the best opportunity for that to happen, and it did happen. And I'm glad that I played a small part in helping make that happen.
Cool, thank you.
So, hi, my name is Jasmine Carey. I'm with the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Our top issues that we worked on this year, we had 6 focus areas, but like the top bills that we did the most work on was the African American Family Preservation Act, and that bill tackles the overrepresentation of African American children in the child welfare system. And then the second bill that we did a lot of work on was the restoration of voting rights, which it's been big over the years, but it had a different focus this year. So.
I'm Anna. I'm facilitating she, her pronouns.
Hi, I'm Nakeso Okochi, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am with the Black Iridium Collective, and the policy we worked on this year was driver's licenses for all and post-conviction relief. And yeah, that's it.
I'm Sylvie Bisangwa with the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, and this year the policy that we were focused on mostly was driver's licenses for all.
Monica Hurtado, Voices for Racial Justice. I was involved with driver's licenses for all as well. Was a large coalition.
All right, well, thank you all. So we really want to start off on a positive note, because sometimes, legislative session can be hard for folks, but we want to know, what were you most proud of from this session?
Well, as I said before, I was Minnesota's first ombudsman for correction. That was an office that handled complaints from prisoners. And it had a life of about 30 years. And then it was eliminated, partly because it lost support from the legislature and also from the executive branch. And that loss of support was primarily because of, I think, a lack of understanding of the office and what it did and its purpose and so on. And a couple of legislators could not fathom prisoners having someone to whom they could complain about what was happening to them in the institution. And so once it was eliminated, took a long time for it to get traction again. There were several times that efforts were made to bring it back, but this time, because there were those who took an interest in it, particularly, this organization played a key role, and also the organization that was interested in the mental health part of that, and I think that was part of what connected, and I had an opportunity to participate in some of those discussions and was invited to testify in both the House and the Senate committee, and we were able to convince the legislature that it was time to bring it back. And the bill was passed, and effective July 1, it will be reestablished. But the biggest task now is to reestablish that office, to staff it, and to make sure that it has the credibility that it needs. And I agreed to participate in that process and working with the Commission of Correction and the Governor to get that reestablished. And probably efforts will get underway on that process sometime in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I know a lot of us here at the office were very excited to get that bill back. So, what other things are we proud of that happened?
I don't know. I guess I have a few things. They're not like super big, but it's like, like our African American Family Preservation Act bill, it made it through every committee in the House side, and it did. It was one of the few bills that got a hearing in the Senate, and it passed committee in the Senate. It just didn't get any other hearings. So it didn't get a hearing at all last session. So even though it didn't get included in the omnibus bill, it was good to get it all the way to the end. And then one provision did get signed, which was the reestablishment of parental rights. So now there's no age limit for when a parent can reestablish their parental rights. They used to have to wait until like one of their children was at least 16 years old. So now that age limit is away, and then you don't have to go through the county attorney's office. So it used to be you have to have the county attorney's office petition the courts and to get your parental rights back. So now you can do it on your own or have your lawyer do it. So it took kind of those barriers out the way with the new bill that the governor signed. So that was exciting. And then I guess another thing is on our day on the Hill, we had a group we work with in Duluth, and they had a legislative visit, and they brought a proposal, and they got Senator Simonson to create a bill with them like 10 days before the first deadline. So it did not get a hearing, but it got the first step of them getting some seed money to have a bill that we can try to push next session. So I guess those
That's
are two
really
big
cool.
things.
No, yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
Congratulations. You
Yeah.
should be proud of that. That's amazing. Anybody proud of anything on this side of the room?
So for the post-conviction relief, I think, I wish some of the folks who were there or here, I just realized, is this was the first time the bill was introduced and it went really far, and that it was even being considered in the public safety committee. It was one of the top things that they were talking about. And so that was a really great moment, especially because the coalition is very small. Most of the folks, including myself, are people who are new to the process. And the work was being pushed also by directly impacted people, so folks who do need this. So post-conviction relief is basically the consequences of convictions on immigrants and detention. And so folks who have really been impacted by this were influencing the policy. And so that was really great. I mean, unfortunately it didn't pass, but that it went this far was good.
Awesome.
Well, I'm very, very, very proud of the work the parents did. So we have an education equity parent fellowship that just graduated on June 20th. They are absolutely amazing. And we had the teachers, being one of the chair, the core committee members of the coalition, I was so excited about when they came and they presented to the parents as guest trainers. And the parents asked how could they be involved. And they stayed involved through the whole course of the bill to increase teachers of color. And so they, did the actions, even though they couldn't show up during the day. They made sure that they called their legislators. They made sure that they emailed their legislators, and they were like deeply involved in that in that work. Which the teacher of color bill, we didn't get what we asked for as far as the money that we really need to increase teachers of color if we really were going to move the needle. But at least we got something, and that's more that we can say for some of the other education work that was in the omnibus bill. Also, the Solutions Not Suspension, which we are also a core team member of as Voices for Racial Justice, they also came out and presented to the parents. And the parents were deeply involved in that work. And one of the bills was to end suspensions and expulsions for pre-K. And the parents and all of us were really excited because we really thought that was going to go, These are the baby babies. I mean, this is pre-K. Why you want to push them out the classes, And so we didn't get it, but I'm super proud of all the effort, not only the parents put in, but the Solutions Not Suspension core team and the coalition as a whole.
That's awesome. Yeah. Anything else?
So I think one thing that I'm really proud of, even more so than the domestic violence and sexual assault prevention bill, which did end up passing. I'm happy about that, although they did not fund it to the extent that they need to in order to do meaningful work in that area. I am so proud of how our communities of color and cultural and ethnic communities came together and really recognized that each of our communities has the strength to do this. And this issue is important and it affects everybody, and it was just a beautiful thing to see so many communities come together. And I think it's partly because the ideas came from community. This idea about prevention, and that this is the one thing that they need that the legislature in the state is not providing, is before violence ever starts in a relationship or in a home. we need to think back to what circumstances allowed this to persist in our community. And so I'm so proud that our community stepped up and delivered.
Yeah, you should be. I would like to mention something about driver's licenses and how it has been a campaign going on for a long, long time. I was realizing that at the same time that the Ombudsman office was closed, the situation of driver's licenses started to happen under the same administration in 2003. So we have a community that has been filing for access to driver's licenses for a long time, longer than a decade. And I'm new to that space and the space of a community following the legislative process and how complex and how difficult it is to be part of that. But how much we were able to how much I was able to learn out of the long and rich history of others who have been fighting for this for a long time. And out of that energy that has been growing for a long time, to see the hearings when we were able to move the bill on the House and we were able to have 5 hearings in 5 different committees, and to see the rooms full of our community members to the point that we had to go to different rooms and every time, because the community has been able to understand, okay, it's important for me to be there. So that's something that despite we were not able to have that same process on the Senate, and the bill didn't pass, which is very sad, but that is something that the memories of the people, regular immigrants being at the spaces, and the people from our different communities being able to testify. It was beautiful to see people from different immigrant communities sharing their stories, and finally, even though still too much work to do, they also to see how there are some voices within our communities that are fighting for collective work, and the recognition that driver's licenses for all is not a Latinx issue. There's still work to be done in that area, but I think now there's more conversation about that than 2 years ago, 5 years ago, and that is something that I feel very excited about.
I'm proud of the bill that we wrote, the driver's license bill, because it is the most protective bill for people who are carrying driver's licenses and who don't have status. So it had a lot of provisions that would protect people's data, and it provided a wider range of documents, including documents that people who are stateless might possess. What else did it have? It had a lot of provisions that a lot of other bills didn't have, and it was going to be the most progressive driver's license for non-immigrants, or for undocumented immigrants in the whole country.
Wow.
So had it passed, it would have been a great thing.
That would have been really cool. Yeah.
Will you continue, I presume you will continue to work on it, that because it didn't pass does not mean that's the end of it.
Yeah.
You'll be back next year and the year after until it does pass.
Yeah, I hope so, because that sounds really cool. That's awesome. So I guess kind of going off that, right, that was very exciting, that bill as a whole, and that work that surrounded it. But kind of what was the most challenging part of that, right? Because with all our successes and our triumphs and our celebrations, there are still things that didn't happen. There's still funding we didn't get. There are still situations that held a lot of tension. So, what was the most challenging aspect of this session for you all?
The Senate. I mean, there's nothing more to say to that. I think the Senate was very aggressive about not agreeing to pass a lot of the things that should have been easy things to pass. So people worked a lot more harder than they should have for things that were, I mean, the best example, I think none of us have talked about this, is because we didn't work on it, is the conversion therapy bill. It's incredible that in 2019 that's still existing in Minnesota. And so I think that's very telling about where the Senate was and what the intentions are about, like, and so I think it frustrated and impacted however else we were working in, whatever coalitions, whatever bills we were trying to pass, and undermined a lot of the work that community and advocates were doing.
Yeah.
It's frustrating to know that all of the resistance that we got was just because of two people, that they have a majority of two people. Because of just because of that, we have to see all of these progressive ideas we have
Have to do something about that next year. This election.
Yeah, exactly.
Start now.
Well, and I think, at least, as someone who wasn't directly involved, but who saw all the work going on, right, was very frustrating, is that they're not just progressive ideas, right? They're not just broad concepts that we're thinking about. Like, these were very, like, tactile things that could have genuinely helped people, right? And like T said, we're gonna keep pushing to make that happen, but people could have been helped so much sooner had things gone differently, right? And I think that's what I hold as really challenging, is discussing all this and hearing how cool these things were and getting excited about it, and like, oh, well, now we have to wait, right? Like that, I think, is another like really big frustrating piece for folks.
You're absolutely correct. You know that think about just basically the disparities around discipline and how it is American Indians are, natives are at the top, indigenous people are at the top, but then there's African American boys are next. So it's actually tied to real breathing people. These solutions are, you look at them on paper and you see maybe some dollar amounts that go with it, but we hear directly how these people wake up every day with a problem but have the solutions. And it was very interesting because we said, okay, let's just start, because we really don't want any kids, pushed out based on their race, right? And their economic status, right? We don't want that. However, we thought, oh, it'll be easy. Who's going to kick out the baby? We're talking about the babies, pre-K. They haven't even really started school yet. It's not even, they haven't went to kindergarten yet. They're little babies. And I was appalled to find out that they get kicked out of class or, daycare. So we were like, okay, that's easy. We thought that was low-hanging fruit. It was not. It was a. So I think the most challenging, even with the teachers of color as well, is the negotiations around what is important. So what can I use to get what I need for this, and what can I use to, you can't get, if I give you this, if you get that, but it's tied to real living people, and that's what is challenging, is to get some see, but a lot do not, because it's part of political thinking, being true to the donors, being true to constituents that don't have black and brown people in their constituent base. So okay, so that's not as important. So it does, for me, it's challenging when you really want to help. And make things better for people, like you said, and people stand in the way.
Yeah.
But voting is a way to to help get people in there that believe in people.
You know, there are a number of things that were accomplished this last session and other sessions. The challenge often is that once you get it, you also have to keep your eyes on it to make sure that it doesn't go away again. Now, another important piece of legislation that came out was the bill that has put in some controls on how the Department of Corrections can use solitary confinement.
Yes.
Now, that's one where it's good that they reestablish the ombudsman at the same time, because that's one that will have to be monitored. Just because it's legislation is on paper doesn't mean that they will discontinue doing what they've been doing. There will have to be someone external to the department that will periodically look in on what's happening and report and challenge the department, because in institutions like prisons, you can quickly slip into these old habits of, particularly if you've got a difficult situation. And in the past, you could simply go and lock the person up in solitary confinement and forget about them. And now there will be an opportunity for the person or the members of the family or those interested in it to raise the question about how long this person has been there. And there's someone who independently can go in and take a look at that. So it's still one that we'll have to keep your eyes on.
Yeah, and I think, at least for me, I think that ties into using real people as bargaining chips, which is done a lot.
Yep.
And it seems really almost immoral, right, to like have to use little babies, right, as bargaining chips to get what you want. And I think it's a really good, kind of like exemplification of an issue that continually goes on. Monica, did you have something?
I was going to say that one of the challenges is how the process is. You go and get trainings and you understand that policy at the legislature happens in a certain way, a bill is introduced, goes to the Senate, the House, passed to committees, there are deadlines, and then it becomes a law at some point. And it's the first time that I was so immersed in the daily actions of the legislature, and it was very confusing and getting the anxiety. Oh, the deadline is getting here. We have not done this or that, and it was always a way to get around. There was always the ones who have been there longer, the legislators in particular, how that I said, oh my God, there are tons of pieces of information that we don't hold as a community. So it was very challenging to see the timeline of the community and the timeline of the legislators, and how different it is, and how you negotiate that. That with the lack of resources, the lack of people, the lack of money, and the process is going regardless. And all those corners that are cut, and it's very hard to understand. So I was kind of feeling the challenge of all the wisdom that in the experience, based on the experiences of our community members, and how we share those. How I wish someone from the community would have told me before this year, hey, and expect this and that, and for multiple reasons that didn't happen, but how we make that happen, how we grow from each other experiences.
Well, I think to like piggyback off of that, because we worked with a lot of community leaders that were working on specific issues, and it's kind of like you can explain like the politics and the legislative session. Like there's the policy and then there's the politics, and the politics is like what keeps everything moving, and those little things you can't learn, you just know. And you have legislators sometimes who are, have expectations that they're sharing with community members about these bills, and because they don't know the politics side, they have certain expectations about like what's gonna happen. And like I think I found myself kind of in the middle of like trying to be that person who knows like who gets all the information and trying to figure out like what do I share, what do I not share, like what's important, what will help move this, and then just learning how to navigate those conversations, because we ask community to show up, we ask them to tell their stories, and like because of our communities, this is so real, it's real life. They're leaving their jobs, they're coming, bringing their kids, like all of that. So it's another layer added to that when we ask them to get involved. So just knowing, I think what was challenging for me is just navigating that piece and not trying to ask too much when I didn't have to, but also trying to find that balance.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I really struggle with this, because so my background is in media, and really thinking about how people have agency over their stories, and when they can share them and when they can't share them, or how they share them. And this process is very painful to watch, because like you said, it's people's lived experience. And for how many years are you going to tell people the same story over and over, that you need this, and it's not that they don't know it, but they do. And so it's like we have to keep testifying, we have to show our faces. And there is power in telling a story and your narrative, but there's also disempowering of people when they keep, like your pain and your trauma is constantly on, like you have to keep
So it's on display.
repeating it, it's on display all the time. And I think that is something that I clearly saw that is a dangerous part of this legislative process, because so for folks who work there and are advocates, they need community, and community also needs them. So it's like a balancing that relationship and negotiating that relationship. At the same time, it's like, how much longer are we going to tell our stories? Like, it's exhausting. And then we have to go back next year, and the year after, and the year after. And it takes a toll on people, it impacts how we relate with each other. And it's just, it's very frustrating. Actually, more than frustrating, enraging.
Yeah, and I think, and it's not specific to this legislative session, but
Yes.
part of it is that, people go there and they own their stories, and you can't believe the power of their stories. And then the legislature moves on with business as usual, and then it almost becomes a competition of whose story is the saddest, and that's not a position we should ever be putting our communities in. And it's, I end up feeling protective almost, and that's not a feeling I want to have either. I want people to be able to own their own stories and not have me getting in the way of that. But I think the other piece is it ties into this larger scheme at the legislature, where it's a competition to the end, who gets money and who doesn't.
Absolutely.
And it's between communities of color sometimes is how it can play out, and that's the ugliest form of this. Or it's between the disability community and cultural communities and the LGBTQ community. And it's, all of these communities exist together. They're not isolated, and yet they are treated as if they are competing. And that you can have this and they can have this, and that's not how the world works. These communities don't live in isolation. We all live together. So.
sounds like the article that we're working, or the blog
Yeah.
post. But the challenge for me was working on reparations, all that happened. It was this last, like the whole session, everything was kind of going along. We were getting ready to have some kind of like special hearing at the end just to keep the reparations bill alive. And we had one community gathering before that where it just fell apart, to the point where like so many were saying, we want to work, the bill is to establish a commission to study reparations proposals for American Indian communities and African American communities in Minnesota. So it's to work in solidarity. And you had a group that was saying, well, we don't want to work in solidarity. It was because they felt that resources were going to be taken away from them. But you had so many in that group saying, well, it's important for us to learn about each other's cultures. And then you had someone say, if I want to know about your culture, I can just Google it.
Oh no.
That is the correct reaction to have. It's like, oh my God, no.
That was what happened. And so that's a serious challenge.
No, I think that's a huge challenge, and I think that's something that we see individually, right, in our work, but it's so much bigger than that. It's, like a national issue with different communities not being able to work together, and it's not because it's inherent in the communities, right? Like that tension isn't inherent in any of us, because we all want the same things, right? Like we all want our rights and basic needs met. It's just that we're operating out of, like, there's not enough, right? When we should be operating out of abundance, because there is enough, it's just not being allocated. And how do we have that discussion, and how do we, address these other issues in our communities, but also recognize that there are people in the in-between, which I think is something that you already mentioned, right? There are people who are Black and Native. There are people who are Black and Native and gay. There are people who are Black and Native and gay and disabled. And right, so how do we take care of everybody, even if they don't fit into our community necessarily, right? Like that's just a bigger question that I'm really glad you brought up, because I think that's a tension that a lot of people felt this session.
Yeah, but also I think in a way too is like what we're kind of getting at is like how do we not get siloed in like the BI, POC like bucket, and like we all have to compete for like these crumbs or this money, because I feel like that's kind of what some bills kind of get labeled as like different, bills. These are for communities of color, and these aren't. So that's probably a different conversation, but I just think it's like an issue. I think that I saw this session is like we're kind of in a way like only a couple of these bills can kind of go through.
Like we don't have enough for all of the issues, so from all of the communities. It can be like a couple from some. Yeah, I definitely see that. Any other thoughts or comments on that? Because I guess what comes from that, right, and like knowing that we're holding that is how do we move forward? So we know that these tensions exist, and we know that that tension is due to a history of colonialism and capitalism, placed upon our communities. And so how do we take what we've learned this session and start to think about what next time should look like?
I'll say for me the biggest lesson, which was also part of the challenge, is that we have to recognize and continuously remember that life exists outside of the capital, and that no matter whether these bills pass or not, we're still going to have to exist. If our rights are taken away in some ways, then what is our alternative world that we're building? Or how are we defending ourselves, or how are we protecting ourselves, whether it's parents, children, native immigrants, or whatever. And I think that gets lost when you're running and racing to meet these deadlines or do whatever, pass a bill. But I think the reason why most of us are doing the work that we do is because we believe in this other, more expansive world where these people have more access to things and rights and all that. So I think that's a constant, that's a lesson that I learned, or that is a lesson that we should take ahead, continuously do with us. Because I actually never thought I would ever work at the Capitol. I don't know if I will next year, because I think it destroyed me in some ways that I don't think I'll recover from. And I think that was a reminder that there's other things that we've been doing for so long and that we should continue doing them.
I will say that I'm in that boat, like what to do next year. Is something that is sustainable? Is this something that is even worth it? We work so hard and the bill didn't pass. So is this the most effective way to use the limited amount of resources that we have? And I go back and forth with the answer because I feel part of me, the rebellious me, feel, oh, that's exactly what the system is designed for. It's designed to keep us away and not engage and traumatized when we get there. So the challenge, the lesson is how we can do this in a way that we survive and thrive. And this trio, I survived the part of my survival toolkit was Nekesa and Sylvie, and to have the opportunity to always be able to go to some of them or the three of us debriefing the experience, and it was one of the things that I found very useful. But what else we can do, and how we use now, I'm thinking how we use this time that we are not in the session to build that collective power that we don't have time and ability to develop while we are in the daily running around. And how much capacity, what's the capacity we need to develop, and how to develop that capacity among our communities, and how, probably this sounds crazy, but how we can have fun. How, it's a question. I don't have the answer.
You can't.
Yeah,
No, but like if that's what it feels like, right, then we need to find a way,
Yeah.
right?
and one of the things that I think also is we need to change that process. Is to learn the process to make it work for us, not to adapt and to assimilate. And now I know the process. I'm the expert. I would be more proud if we, as a group, someday we can say, and we change it.
I agree, because I think of like started Restore the Vote, introduced like 2003. We're still trying to push it. Didn't even, it got on the floor in the House, in the Senate years ago. It didn't even get a hearing this year. So it's like, and you think about all these bills that we're working on, I'm like, oh, this bill could take 4 years to pass, this bill could take 5. But that shouldn't be like acceptable. Like, I think we're so used to like the process and how learning and figuring out how it moves and like knowing how to like work with the process, rather than, you know, like never really asking like what could change or like how could this be better. Just because we're so used to just figuring out how it works and just getting clued in like everyone else, since we've been excluded for so long. Because like the process, you know, like our councils, they came in the 1980s because our communities weren't represented at the Capitol. And like we're still here, so it's like this process wasn't really made for us in mind, and we've been, you know, added on later on. So how can we, you know, I think I agree with you, like it could be changed, or it could be, you know, looked at in a different way.
No, and I think, oh no, go for it, Jen.
I think that the reactions this year think I heard it more because it seemed like we had so much traction on a lot of things, and then it was shut down as soon as it came to a certain place, right? And,
Apparently the Senate.
Yeah, the Senate.
Apparently that's
Yeah,
where.
yeah. And so, so the hope was built up so high on multiple issues and multiple levels that would have been life-changing and life-altering for communities. I mean, really, might seem small, but it would have turned the lives around of people who wake up in the problem every day and was heard about what the solution needs to be to change their lives. And then people pick up the mantle along with them and say, this is what I need that will be life-changing, that will change my life. And then to be said, you don't matter. You know, your life is insignificant. Nobody care about you. You know, it seemed like this year it hurt on like a different, deeper level. I mean, really, we can't act brand new because this happens all the time. We ask for stuff and they tell us, right? But this year, you know, it just seemed to be so much more hopeful and promising, right? To get hit with that. So thinking about reflecting on what's the lesson? Is the lesson not to hope? You know, is the lesson not to get excited for the promise of what can be? Oh, that's not the lesson, right? So the lesson is we continue to try because that's the people we are. We're resilient in thinking of that. Because hope is what gets us through the struggle. You know, the promise of more is what gets us through the struggle. The promise of better is what gets us through the struggle, right? However, we have to move and go and move, whatever it takes for us to be able to do that, right? So communities, you know, talking to communities and hearing communities say, you know, this was hard this year. And to ask the question, what do you need? And here, I just want to just decompress. Be with like-minded people. Eat. And always eat. Our people like to eat. Eat. Hear good music. You know, celebrate even though this was hard. It was necessary, right? So listening to that, so we're going to do that. We're just going to create a space for that because that's what we do. Come on in, eat. You know, talk like we're doing here, but talk more about that and create that space for them to come on in this Sunday and have that. So the lesson to me this year, based on hearing directly from people who've been working on this session on multiple things, and even in local government and stuff that's happening, and even in school boards and stuff that's happening, right? They need a space, right? They need a space, and so we can provide that space. But I think that to Monica's credit, it's like, it's fun, you know, so we just called it a school called Stay Connected and Celebrate. Celebrate that effort, that what I said, even though it might have went, we put in the effort, we put in the work, we put in the time. So let's celebrate that. Let's celebrate that. Let's honor that. Even though it might not have been honored at the Capitol, we honor it, right? Because we put in the work, right? So then, how do we make it be fun? How do we create more things like that? More opportunities to come together, to share our resilience, to share. Someone said, good place to come and lick your wounds. I'm like, we don't want to lick no wounds. You know, we want to celebrate the effort and talk about, even though we might be hurt, we still gonna get up and move and still gonna do more. So I think that that's the biggest lesson that I took away. That, you know, we're some resilient people, and I think next year we're gonna try again because that's what we do. So.
No, I think that really flows well into the next question / consideration. I was hoping to get feedback from you all is how do you take care of yourself? And how do you take care of your body and your mind and your soul while you're in the thick of it, right? While you're in that daily grind, because it's crazy and it's a lot and it's very fast paced. And how do your communities also take care of each other, right? There's kind of a twofold piece to that.
Yesterday I had lunch at a farm after our staff meeting, and I was listening. We were having a conversation about Black and indigenous solidarity, and the woman I was having lunch with, she's Native, and she was saying that in her circles, before any conversations could happen around reparations, there had to be a conversation around what are those common things that unite us, our communities. And she said it was land, in her experiences, land and I forgot what the other one was. It was land, I want to say like water, yeah. It was land, water, and it was something else. But she was saying that until we were able to kind of identify those pieces, people weren't on the same page, and there was a lot of bickering and going back and forth. So having that conversation, being around people who kind of are a little bit farther along than I am in these conversations, and learning how to facilitate these kinds of conversations in spaces away from the capital, like on a farm, in over a meal, like you were saying. I find that to be like really healing, and that's really what I like to do to take care of myself. Always like debriefing with people and learning.
Yeah, I'd say as Monica had said earlier, having a community of people, I think for me, finding people who I could trust and debrief with and pack stuff with was very important. And I also, I think we talk about self-care or taking care of ourselves, and we say we're going to do it, we'll say self-care, then we don't do it. Or even sometimes what we do is not enough, because in the thick of things, I would check out, but I'd still be very stressed. I would, I'd go dancing, I'd listen to music, I'd go to concerts, I would eat. I love mangoes a lot, so I would I still would, whatever I was doing was never even whether it was meditating, so I guess it's not that it's not possible, but I think because of the pace and because of everything that's going on, unless you completely remove yourself, even then, it's still such an active part of becomes part of your bloodstream that I really struggled. That's why I'm talking about this, what is the best use of my time and my passion, and is because there's a lot of work to do, inside and outside of the legislative process. So anyway, yeah, I did try to self-care.
So you eat mangoes?
Yeah,
Yes.
I eat mangoes, avocados. I cook too. Yes. I also cook. I cook for people. I cook for myself. Several glasses of wine and whiskey, rum, and some other things that I can't mention.
I see you cooking really well.
I'm trying.
I make a mean mango salsa, so I'll make sure that
I really actually have a thing for mangoes. I go all over the cities, because you can know when they're in season in all over Central America, different countries, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador. So I have a chart somewhere, so I just find them. During the winter, I will.
Can you share your research?
Yeah, well, can you share your research and can you share your recipe?
Yeah, all right. Yeah,
self-care.
Okay,
And
cool.
that-
Well, that's important to acknowledge, though.
Yeah, I mean, like, I gained like 20 pounds this session. So that wasn't good, but it was also like my first time in the role that I'm at. Like at my agency, I started in September in this role, so I didn't have that much time to prepare for session. And then like I just kind of dived in once January came along. So I worked like a lot of late nights and the days where I'm just trying to like think about like the best way to like approach something because I'm like new. So I think that took up a lot of mental space. So just like having time alone was really good and like space to just like not think about stuff that was work related was really good. Because of like the testimonies and because like the like real life stories like I hear and that are connected to this stuff, I would like start to get super defensive about like certain these issues because you're working with agencies, you're working with other outside organizations that have like different interests, but they're not like people centered, they're not community centered. So I guess I would like I'm gonna be thinking about that this summer, like how to institute self-care. I just came back from vacation, so that was nice. So I feel like now I'm like session is off my mind. Now we're like starting planning next year, so it's not really off. But and then like for the community, I don't think like the community that I like work with really did self-care as well in regards to this issue because it just you don't know what to expect. Those expectations when you think something is moving like super fast and you might have something and then like all hope is gone for like this year, that can be like detrimental and kind of can stop the grind or what someone was pursuing, like, you know, and being an advocate or whatever. So I think just figuring out how that happens is something I think that I'm just gonna like kind of marinate on because that's a good, I haven't thought about that.
Normally during self-care, I will exercise and that helps me sleep well, moderates my mood, makes everything just kind of work well, but that did not happen during the session. And what you said, Mikesa, about remembering to get out of it is really important because no matter what, that's always going to keep going. And if you're not taking care of yourself, you might not be able to keep going yourself. So it's really important to remember. That was something I had a health issue happen, so and I had to get out of the session, and that's something that I was reminded of. Okay, like if you don't take care of yourself, it's going to keep moving, but you're not going to keep. So.
No, it's like, and I think especially bringing it back to like the community as a whole, if you stop your work and you burn out, then all the knowledge that you hold goes with you, and then that's information lost and that's progress lost, right? And so in order to be useful for your community or for whatever causes as a whole, you have, like you as a person, right, you and your body have to be able to sustain yourself. And so how do you do that? And then how do you do that with communities as a whole, right? When we're just trying to survive with what we've been given, how do you reconcile survival mode with also like genuinely trying to take care of yourself and one another? I think is like a very big, large question that we're not going to answer right now, but I think it's just like further, like you said, to just think on before next session, so that we might be a little more ready.
I wanted to share this thing that I learned from Ricardo Levis Morales, and he was talking about something else, I think in dealing with tension, and he shared this name, claim, and refrain. But I found part of the beauty of having Sylvie and Mikesa and voices, the privilege of being a staff member of Voices and having a space where I was able to share my experience, my frustration, my pain, my hopes. It was especially the power of reframing, and how when you are inside that building and all that it represents in terms of the oppression coming from systems who have been which have been designed for that purpose. And to be able to find the space and the people that can remind you why we do what we do, and how it's possible to do it in a way that is more meaningful and more powerful. And so that possibility, even when we were going through difficult moments, and naming those moments, and claiming of those moments what is mine and what is not, and what is mine as Monica, what is mine as part of the community, what is mine as part of Voices, and reframing in those moments was something that I found very, very helpful in terms of my own self-care, when others were helping me to reframe what I was seeing in a certain way. No, Monica, maybe this other way, and how when we create our own systems of love and accountability among ourselves, that make the process more sustainable and more enjoyable. Even the difficult moments become opportunities for growth. So how it's something that a question that I have now is how we can do this work in a way that we can sustain ourselves and our communities while we do the work. Not to wait, let's finish the session and take a break, but how we do the work in a way that, we grow, I don't know.
I think, so I've been organizing since 1996 and been at Voices since 2007. And I just recently realized how to really practice self-care, right? And so I think, because self-care, most of us have probably been on an airplane, but self-care basically is what the flight attendants say: put the oxygen mask on yourself first, and then help everyone else, right? And so I just recently, you could say over the last few years, actually realized how valuable that is, to really take care of yourself, because you cannot take care of anyone else if you do not do that, right? But then how do you do it in a way that makes it not only sustainable to yourself and your body and everything, but also your spirit, right? And so I really get a lot of pleasure working with my community, especially working with parents and youth, that I can actually give them the tools for self-care. Because a lot of times communities don't think that they, are work. It's like in society and in a lot of communities, we're taught to take care of others, especially as women. We're taught that we have to put everybody else before yourself, right? And that happens a lot in many cultures, right? That happens. But being able to ask somebody, what do you do for self-care? Self-care, even when we started on this healing justice journey and all of this stuff here at Voices, I was thinking that was kind of foo-foo. I'm an organizer. That's too foo-foo. I need to be out there in the thick of it, right? But to be able to be out in the thick of it, yes. But you also have to be your best self to be out in the thick of it, right? And so being able to carry on the lessons that we've learned here at Voices and the tools that we've created around healing justice, around wellness, and around self-care, and give those to communities and have them actually have the tools to take out even further into their community is the way community takes care of community.
For sure, yeah. And I think I kind of want to jump back to Monica, what you were saying a little bit with what keeps you doing this work. And I think that's what we have on the paper is what keeps you at the Capitol. And I don't think that's enough. Because we know what keeps us at the Capitol. It's the fact that that's the way the system is right now. That's where you have to be physically. but kind of what do you dream of? What's the world you envision that keeps you going, right? Like, what is that hope that Julia was mentioning before? What is that that you see that can be better? And how does that keep you in this? So if you need an example, for me, what keeps me going, right, is this idea that like someday we could have a society that doesn't have prisons and doesn't have borders. And is that very bold and in the future? Maybe. But that's what keeps me at Voices, and that's what keeps me so invested in racial justice, right, is like this hope that maybe it could be better. And those are the things that I want. So what are some of the things that you all envision? Julia, you look like you have something.
Yes,
Both Julias look like they have some really distinct things they
Well,
want.
Julia, do you want to go first, or
No, you go first.
Well, the biggest thing that I dream about the work is, because I've been doing the education equity work since 2007. I'm just going to go and talk about the Capitol first. I would love to not have education be the last thing off the floor. Because once they make that last vote, there's nowhere to go. You know, there's no opportunities for change. And what is being negotiated and messed around with and figured out is what's left over from all the other stuff they did. So it seems like always education is super shorted. And it's about investment, right? It's about investment in public education. This is public education. And this is about investment, so everything else is put before, pretty much before the babies. Even though babies show up in all different places, human services and whatnot, but I just think the education of our babies should be important. And it shouldn't be the last thing off the floor. It's always the last negotiating tool. It's always the last back door kind of thing. We'll give you this for education if you give us that for this, you know. And so our babies are really pawns in this whole legislative game. So my wish, my hope is that education is the first thing that's negotiated for and not the last thing, because then it shows that our babies are not important. You know, the future is not important for our babies. So especially Black and brown and indigenous kids, you know, so.
For sure.
Yeah.
What other things?
For me, it's like it's in the name of this organization. I work for Voices for Racial Justice, and you know, we get to do that through creativity, research, policy, and sharing ideas amongst ourselves. And I'm doing this work because the world and growing up, it just places so many limitations on me. It placed so many limitations on me. Perceived or real, they were limitations. And so I'm working to remove those limitations for future generations. Because when I get a glimpse of what it feels like to not have limitations, to be in that abundance, it's just magical. And I want that world, you know, so that's what keeps me in the work.
Other Julia, did you have something you want to share?
Well, I mean, obviously, I resonate with yours around no prisons and no borders, and I think it sounds like a larger than possible, but I think if we start thinking about freedom in that way, then it expands everything else that we're talking about. It includes education justice, it includes healthcare access, it includes us thinking about the world in a more expansive way, and that we have more resources than we think we do, and we think about water and how we should not be wasting it and destroying it. and all the things that we don't need that we have. So I think it's like, it seems really large and impossible to get to, but it's possible because every day there are people who are living these lives, and oppressing people is an option. Like that's something that people are doing very deliberately. Taking access and resources from people is an active form of violence, and but sharing is not. It's love and it's kindness, and so that's like the world I dream of, and what I am hoping that our collective work gets us to.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Okay. I guess my vision or world that I dream of, like on a big scale, I mean, where my agency, I guess, wouldn't need to exist. Essentially, because the work is already happening, or we're being thought of, we're not being overlooked, or my community is not being disinvested in since it's happened for so long. So kind of just like those things that need to be fixed, those institutional and structural things, for those to not be there, and we have liberation, so we won't have to like fight every single battle to just like make our voice heard, or if it's a big issue, we don't have to worry about, okay, we need to make someone's in there because they're not thinking about specific barriers that happen with this specific issue, because they're thinking of the way it impacts the whole everyone rather than intersectionally, and how this impacts certain communities. So I just think on a larger scale for my organization to not exist in a way where it's just a thought, where it's just like this is how policy should work.
For sure. Monica or something?
For me, it's justice also. Like I'm really justice minded, and like I dream of a world where there's no mass incarceration. People aren't like having to cross borders because they want to have food. Kids aren't in cages and things like that. I think to do this kind of work, you have to be really stubborn, because we keep fighting for the same thing every year. And sometimes, we have to go back year after year after year, and just remembering why you're there, and remembering, and I think it's a great question to end with, because it's reminding us. We talked about challenges, lessons we've learned, like why are we coming back again year after year after year? It's this, we believe in something.
Absolutely.
I would say is to feel powerful, as Monica and with others, and that I belong to something powerful. And one of the definitions of power that I love the most is the ability to define your reality. And systems of oppression remove that from us, our ability to define our own realities. So that ability to feel powerful because we are being subversive and disruptors, it's what drives me to do the work. And when you find good partners in crime, and that you feel that you belong to that tribe of people who want to feel powerful together, because there's so much power that we are in that abundance, and not in that scarcity that if you are powerful, that means I'm not. But if you are powerful, and even we together are even more powerful than alone. I think it's that emotion that I pursue, the emotion of being powerful as an individual, but as an individual who is part of a world that is better than
Than what we have.
yeah.
Yeah. It is.
No, I think that's great. I think the other word that I would, just to add on to that, that I would prescribe to that is agency, right? Not just power. I tend to be very wary of the word power just because of how white men co-opt it, right? But like you said, like the agency to choose your own life and how you want to live it, I think is really important. So that's the last formal question we have. Does anyone have any last comments, thoughts, concerns?
We managed not to say white until right now.
What?
We managed not to say white until right now.
Wow.
And it was me who said it. So
I actually was thinking about it before you said it because I think it's powerful actually to be able to have a conversation where we're centering ourselves and pushing the work on our terms. Even though we know that when we talk about the capital, we are talking about whiteness and white supremacy. And at the same time, we're also recognizing the power that we have ourselves and like how we can push through this work. So that's all. The end.
like that's what's exciting, right? What's exciting isn't, I'm gonna say it again, all white dudes at the Capitol or old white dudes wherever or anybody at the Capitol, right? What's exciting is for me what I think of like as the off season from the legislature is like this, what goes on here, right? And like talking about what we can do outside of the formal policy and bills, like that's what's exciting to me, for sure. Any other thoughts?
I just want to thank you for organizing this. This is a great conversation.
No, thank you for coming.
It's a great idea.
Thank you. Well, with that, I think we will be done. Thank you all. Yeah,